Good morning. I'm Ellen Schwartzel, Ontario's Acting Environmental Commissioner. Today I am releasing the Environmental Commissioner's annual report to the Legislature. First, a few words about our office. We report on how ministries are meeting their stewardship responsibilities for Ontario's environment, for water, air, plants and animals, and other natural resources. The ministries have a huge job. Our reports on how they perform that job are intended as practical tools for Ontarians. With the help of our reports, Ontarians can track how their common natural heritage is being managed and protected. Ontario is still the only province that gives its citizens the explicit right to receive notice and have a say on environmental decisions. Provinces like Manitoba are now introducing similar legislation. Thanks to Ontario's Environmental Bill of Rights, the public gets our annual update on the environmental decision-making of ministries. This year, our report is titled, Small Things Matter. Let me start with some observations on water. Each year, huge quantities of ground and surface water are taken through Ontario's water permit program. Our report notes that most of these water users still pay nothing for the water, including agriculture, municipalities, the sand and gravel industry, golf courses, and so on. They pay nothing, but the water taken is not without cost. The Ontario government, in fact, spends over $16 million per year on water quantity management. The few industries that are charged only pay $3.71 per million liters of water. This works out to less than $10 to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The charges recover only 1.2% of the ministry's actual water quantity program costs. Both our office and the 2012 Drummond Report have urged the province to move towards full cost pricing for water because it will encourage users to conserve. We also know that the province ought to do a lot more on water stewardship, considerably more than current tight budgets allow. So a second argument for water charges is that we need to strengthen resourcing for water management. Still on water, our report observes that many water-taking permits are shrouded from public scrutiny and comment. In fact, over half of all high-risk permits and over 3/4 of moderate-risk permits do not show up on the Environmental Registry for consultation due to outdated blanket exemptions for agricultural, municipal, and short-term water takings. These are permits that the public should have a right to see and comment on, and not only because transparency is a worthy principle. Ontarians should be paying attention to water quantity issues. Our province is relatively water-rich, but constraints and conflicts over water do arise, especially in areas of rapid growth. Good news deserves the spotlight, too. For example, our report commends the Ontario government for stepping in when the Experimental Lakes Area, a world-class ecological research institute, lost its federal funding in 2012 and was threatened with closure. This institute has contributed game-changing science to issues like phosphate pollution, acid rain, and mercury in aquatic food chains. So $2 million per year is a very wise investment. Another bright spot this year was the Ontario government's update to its list of noxious weeds. These changes mean that people in Ontario are now allowed to grow milkweed. Why does that matter? Because milkweed is critical food for the declining monarch butterfly. And we can be encouraged that 1,100 Ontarians took the time to comment about milkweed via the Environmental Registry. Civic engagement may seem a small matter, but it has large implications. I'll say more about the registry in a moment. Ontario parks and protected areas also feature in today's report. We observe that it has been years since the province spent any significant money to acquire new conservation lands. The government's land acquisition programs have been reduced from about $5 million a decade ago to just $1,000 last year for the entire province. That makes it nearly impossible to protect new parcels of environmentally significant land. This is especially true in southern Ontario, where parks cover only about 1% of the land and where most of our species at risk live. $1,000 will not go very far in purchasing land in southern Ontario. It is an extremely small amount of money, and it matters. Similarly, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has no fund allowing it to restore degraded parklands. Degradation may be caused by invasive species, visitor impacts, or historical land uses. The point is that provincial parklands often need some restoration work to protect ecological integrity. And ecological integrity is supposed to be the top priority for Ontario protected areas. Ontario's Parks Law makes that clear. So the ministry should be setting strategic priorities for restoration and should have a fund to make it possible. Our report has a simple story to tell about birds. Birds are killed by flying into buildings. A small thing, you might say. But when a city like Toronto is on a major bird migration route, the numbers of birds killed can be substantial and can include species at risk. The Ontario Court of Justice decided in 2013 that reflected light, responsible for bird deaths, is a contaminant under the Environmental Protection Act. That decision placed the responsibility to regulate with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Ontario citizens used the Environmental Bill of Rights to press the ministry to act. And the ministry has just announced that it does want to work with stakeholders and the public to find ways, non-regulatory ways evidently, to better protect birds from colliding with buildings. Our office will monitor the ministry's approach. We hope the outcome actually will be for the birds this time. I mentioned the Environmental Registry earlier. The Environmental Registry is an online database. It enables Ontarians to engage with ministries on environmental decisions, allowing a two-way conversation between the government and the public. So it's a vital tool for citizens, but as our report points out, it badly needs an overhaul. The registry's website has the look and feel and functionality of a bygone age. It is truly not suited for mobile devices, and in effect, that's cutting out the whole younger generation of Ontarians who want to have their say on environmental issues. The Ministry of Environment and Climate Change runs the Environmental Registry. The ministry itself agrees an update is overdue, so this should be an easy fix. These are just a few highlights from our report, and there are many other fascinating stories to discover, and now I'd be happy to take your questions.
On water, do your concerns include water bottling companies?
Well,
Are they among the ones that are getting that less than $4 for 1 million liters and then selling it to us for way higher prices?
water bottling companies are currently charged a very low nominal rate for water. So many industry sectors pay nothing, but water bottling companies and other beverage manufacturers do pay that very low nominal rate right now. It's $3.71 per million liters.
Are you concerned about the amount of water that the bottling companies in particular are taking?
To be fair, water bottling companies take a very small proportion of the overall water that's taken. When you look at the overall pie chart, there are many other industries and municipalities as well that take larger quantities of water.
Do you think municipalities should be paying the province for the water then to help recover costs at the provincial level, or should it be all the industries that are born, or is that political decision?
I think that it needs to be phased in and looked at, but certainly the water costs for municipalities should be looked at.
And is that water for municipal water systems?
That's right.
What's the impact of that cost being so low? What's the environmental impact of it being so cheap to get water?
Well, one practical impact is that water conservation is still not on the radar for many industry sectors, and so we need to change that gradually. And as well, as we've mentioned, the ministries, not only the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, but other ministries as well that have the responsibility to watch water quantity, they're under very tight budget restraints, and for them to do a better job, we need to start charging something that reflects the true cost of water.
So was this, how would you characterize this charge in terms of its the extent to which it recovers the true cost of water?
Right now, it's negligibly small. It's 1.2% of what the actual current water quantity management costs are. So they're only recovering a little tiny fraction.
Do you have a sense of how that compares to other provinces?
Our report doesn't have a lot of information on that, but I understand that other provinces are charging more. Definitely, Quebec, for example, and Manitoba, and so we ought to look at those provinces and learn from them.
What about the agriculture sector? I mean, clearly they must be one of the bigger users. They are currently getting their water for free, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so again, you're suggesting that the
That-
province will get some sort of cost recovery there.
That's right. Begin to look at some sort of cost that applies to the various sectors, including agriculture. Yeah.
Measuring. I'm sorry, just gonna ask, what are the effects? How can you better describe the effects that you talked about, the East Holland River and the Grand River watershed, on all this water being withdrawn, and how does that manifest itself in practical ways that people might notice on those rivers?
Yeah. Do you know what's happening on those rivers is really a bunch of things. In part, those watersheds are being paved over, and so that means that the slow recharge of the groundwater isn't happening the way it used to. And so that affects that's why in part you see those base flows for those rivers, especially during dry seasons, not being what they used to. And that has implications not just for the people who use the water, but for the ecosystems, for the fish and everything else that depends on the water.
Have you calculated the impact it could have on the economy? Let's say we would make the companies pay more for their water. Some people are going to say, well, that's going to drive the companies out of Ontario, for example, because it's a comparative advantage we have here. Have you measured maybe the cost it would mean economically to raise those charges?
I think it would be vanishingly small. I mean, if you it might be on the order of 1/10 of 1 cent per liter of water if they decided to pass all the costs through. So I really don't think it would be a burden. And it could be phased. That you'd want to phase it in, of course. Yeah.
The ministry says in its comments in the report that they agree with your comments about the water taking charge and is developing options for a change framework, whatever that means. What could you sort of talk a bit about what is the urgency of the government acting?
Well,
how long you've been waiting for them
we have been waiting for a number of years on this. We've been recommending this, and the Drummond Commission in 2012 made it very clear that user pay is the way to go. It was in the provincial budget, I think, a couple of years ago that they were going to take this step. So really, we're really eager to see this move forward. Yeah, it's been a while coming, and as was alluded to, other provinces are likely ahead of us on this. So we really need to move on it.
Do you figure if they recovered more of that money for the water that they could spend more than $1,000 on buying new land in southern Ontario?
Yeah, it's possible. That's a novel concept. Yeah, more than $1,000.
Why they would have $1,000 even in there? I mean, you couldn't get a title search, I wouldn't imagine.
No, you couldn't. No, I think it's just a notional sort of line item.
Just to keep the line item.
That's right. Yeah.
You didn't have a chance to see anything in the report about climate change and.
I reported on that in the summer.
From that summer report, but I mean that's right now that's the big thing that we're all waiting for, is to see what their carbon pricing policies are going to be. To how crucial is what the government brings in the way of carbon pricing to the health of the environment in this province?
It is crucial. It's a crucial step. They're expecting over the long term to see a lot of societal change as a consequence of the pricing of carbon, not just in this province, but it's happening across jurisdictions. So really, it's happening everywhere, and so it's a sea change, and we really shouldn't be behind on that. And I don't think we will be. I think that's going to be moving forward.
What kind of problems are we seeing in provincial parks from the degradation that you're talking about and the invasive species? Like, is there just too much foot traffic in the parks and they're not spending enough money to keep up with keeping things maintained? Can you explain that and also go a bit into some of the invasive species and what you're noticing on the ground from that?
Well, you're right that in some cases it's a case of parks being loved to death, very popular beaches and so on. But just for a practical example, you could probably look this up online. Darlington Provincial Park has a bay associated with it, McLaughlin Bay, which has become degraded over the years and is no longer connected properly with Lake Ontario. So the water quality is degraded. There's salt in the water temperatures are too high. And so the park planners know that, to bring up that ecological integrity as they're supposed to, they need to do some restoration work. And so they do the planning and they lay it all out, and then it becomes a big question, where will the money come from?
What about birds? Can you explain the problem with birds and skyscrapers? What is it called, refractive light? Or
A reflected light. Well, I mean, birds are not evolved to deal with skyscrapers, but they are evolved to migrate, and because we're on the Great Lakes, they just have always come through southern Ontario and past Toronto, and then the city grew up, and they're still coming by. And they become disoriented. It's nighttime. Even during daytime, we're finding that they're disoriented by reflected. Often it looks like they're flying into parkland when in fact it's a wall of windows. So I think the science is evolving on this, and I think one of the encouraging things here is that we know there are things that building managers can do. You can add these fritted window treatments, even as retrofits, so it doesn't need to happen during construction. And so they're constantly finding new ways to kind of get birds to tune in that they should move aside.
would ease the reflection?
That's right, yeah. What they do is they recognize it as a surface, I guess.
Better to keep the lights on for the building?
I think typically it's better to keep the lights off, yeah. Lights off at night, and lights off at night, and pay attention to daytime reflective surfaces.
So there's a lot of work to be done there.
A lot
because
of work to be done. That's right. There's a huge amount of work to be done on that, yeah.
You seemed a little skeptical. You said that you guessed they were dealing with it in non-regulatory ways.
Mm-hmm.
I sense some doubt there.
Well, I think that the ministry is interested in going the voluntary approach, and what the nonprofit groups that have been working on this for so many decades are saying is we've tried the voluntary approaches and we're not seeing any traction. And so the fact that the Ontario Divisional Court said you have the opportunity, it's now open to you to regulate, that opened the door, and they could, I think it is still open to the ministry to say, well, where we see hot spots, where we see buildings that are particularly problematic, and not every building is the same, but where we see hot spots, maybe we need to think about orders, right?
Is there any example of voluntary approach that worked?
Well, as I mentioned, using things like fritted glass, or using window shades.
People voluntarily use that so far?
Here and there, but it's. I think that the people who go out at the crack of dawn and monitor and track these bird deaths are definitely still seeing a great deal of mortality.
Is the concern about regulation just compliance costs? Do you know why the ministry would be shying away from regulating?
I think you'd have to ask the ministry that, yeah.
Do all
Minister?
these glass condos that are going, all these condos that are going up that are essentially glass shoeboxes on their side there, are they part of the problem as well, or do you know if they're taking steps to sort of mitigate the impact of light on birds?
Well, I mean, here's a good example where a regulatory approach is being used, for example, by the City of Toronto. It's saying to its new condo towers, we have the Toronto Green Standards. You want to build here? Here's what we need you to do. And the developers are saying, tell us where to sign up, because they want to build. So, so that's a requirement, and I think it's up to 4 stories. Certain kinds of treatments are needed. It's the retrofits that are more of the challenge, right? And that's where there isn't a regulatory approach by the City of Toronto.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.